A desperate girl knocks on a millionaire's door, holding a baby in her arms. Through tears, she begs, "Please let me be your maid." Upon welcoming her, he discovers a secret from the past that he swore to forget. Now he must decide whether to continue helping the children or face the consequences that could destroy his future. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Tell us which city you're watching us from and we'll keep going. On the icy streets of the city, where the biting wind seemed to penetrate to the bone, Lena walked with determined steps, her attentive eyes searching every corner in search of something useful. At just 12 years old, she already carried on her shoulders the weight of a difficult life, learning to survive on her own in a world that seemed to have forgotten her. The day had barely dawned, and the grey sky promised another day of intense cold. Lena adjusted the worn-out coat she was wearing, a precious find from a few months ago, and continued her daily search. Her fingers, red and numb, rummaged through the trash containers with the skill of someone who was already accustomed to this routine. As she rummaged through one of the containers, something unusual caught her attention. A subtle, almost imperceptible movement made her stop for a moment. Intrigued, Lena pushed aside some wet cardboard boxes and, to her surprise, came across a small package that was moving slightly. Her heart racing, she carefully removed the rags covering what she soon discovered was a newborn baby. The child, so fragile and defenseless, was shivering from the cold, his lips already turning a bluish color. Lena felt a lump form in her throat, a mixture of shock and compassion taking over her being. Without a second thought, she took off her own coat and wrapped it around the baby, pressing him against her chest in an attempt to warm him. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, more to herself than to the child. "I'll take care of you." With the precious bundle in her arms, Lena ran as fast as she could towards her makeshift shelter under the bridge. The place wasn't much, just a small space protected by tarps and pieces of cardboard, but it was the closest thing to a home she had at the moment. Upon arriving, Lena quickly arranged a more comfortable spot, using the few blankets she had to create a makeshift bed for the baby. She carefully laid him down and began to examine him, looking for any signs of injury or illness. The baby was a boy, she noticed, and he looked like he had been born very recently. His eyes, when they finally opened, were a deep blue that reminded Lena of the sky in happier days. "You need a name," she murmured, gently stroking the little one's cheek. After a moment of thought, she decided, Noah. His name will be Noah. The name came to her like a sudden inspiration, bringing with it a sense of hope. Noah, like the ark that sailed over the floodwaters, carrying the promise of a new beginning. Lena felt that somehow the name sealed a pact between them, a silent promise that whatever happened, they would face it together. In the days that followed, Lena devoted herself entirely to Noah's care. She used all her ingenuity and limited resources to keep him fed and warm. She collected rainwater and boiled it to make makeshift bottles, using formula milk she found at donation centers. She changed his diapers made from scraps of old cloth, washing them in the river and drying them in the cold wind. Every day was a race against time and harsh conditions. Lena knew she couldn't keep Noah safe for long under the circumstances. The baby needed medical care, a clean, warm environment and adequate food, things she couldn't provide living on the streets. At night, while Noah slept, Lena lay awake, her brain working tirelessly to find a solution. It was during one of these sleepless nights that she remembered hearing about Victor, a millionaire known for his philanthropic actions in the city. Stories about Victor were almost legendary among the homeless. It was said that he had lost a son and had since devoted much of his fortune to helping children in need. Some even said that he occasionally opened the doors of his mansion to provide temporary shelter to homeless families. The idea of searching for Victor began to take shape in Lena's mind. It was risky, certainly. She didn't know how she would be received or if she would even be able to get close to the mansion. But looking at Noah, so small and vulnerable, Lena knew she had to try. Not for herself, but for the baby that fate had placed in her arms. With that decision made, Lena began to plan. She would spend the next day gathering information about the exact location of Victor's mansion and the best way to get there. She would also need to think about how to approach the subject, what she would say to convince the millionaire to help them. As the night wore on, Lena finally felt sleep coming. Lying next to Noah, she whispered a promise. "Tomorrow we'll try to find a better place for you, little one. I don't know if it will work, but I promise I'll do my best." With that thought, she fell asleep, her dreams filled with images of a warm, welcoming home where she and Noah would be safe. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but also the possibility of a change that could alter the course of their lives forever. Dawn brought with it a cold mist that hung over the city streets, shrouding the city in a grey blanket. Lena woke before the first rays of sunlight, her body tense with anticipation of what she was about to do. Beside her, Noah slept peacefully, oblivious to the importance of that day. Careful not to wake the baby, Lena began to gather the few belongings she considered essential. An extra blanket, some improvised diapers, some formula she had gotten the day before. Everything was meticulously organized in a worn backpack that had long accompanied her on her walks through the streets. As she braced herself, Lena couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and hope. What she was about to do was risky, she knew that. Approaching a millionaire's mansion, asking a complete stranger for help. It all went against the survival instincts she had developed on the streets. But looking at Noah, so small and vulnerable, she knew she had no choice. "Come on, little one," Lena whispered as she carefully picked Noah up in her arms. "Today could be the day that changes our lives." With the baby held tightly against her chest and the backpack on her back, Lena left her makeshift shelter under the bridge. The walk to Victor's mansion was long, and she knew she would have to be careful. The city streets could be dangerous, especially for a girl alone carrying a baby. Lena walked with determination, her eyes alert to every movement around her. She avoided the main streets, opting for alleys and less busy paths. With each block she passed, the scenery around her gradually changed. The abandoned and dilapidated buildings gave way to well-kept homes, and soon Lena found herself in a neighborhood that seemed to belong to another world. Stately mansions stood behind ornate gates, meticulously manicured gardens stretching as far as the eye could see. Lena felt out of place in the surroundings, her presence a stark contrast to the opulence around her. Still, she pressed on, driven by the need to find a safe place for Noah. Finally, after what seemed like hours of walking, Lena spotted the address she was looking for. Victor's mansion was undoubtedly the most imposing of them all. A high wall surrounded the property, and a wrought iron gate guarded the entrance. Lena hesitated for a moment, the reality of what she was about to do finally hitting her full force. With shaky legs, she approached the intercom next to the gate. Her finger hovered over the button for a few seconds before finally pressing it. The high-pitched sound of the intercom echoed, making Lena flinch slightly. "Residents, how may I help you?" A formal, distant female voice responded after a few moments. Lena swallowed, gathering all the courage she could. "Please," she began, her voice shaking. "I need to speak to Mr. It's an emergency." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Lena could almost feel the hesitation of the person who answered. "Sir, you're not accepting visitors at the moment. If you could leave your name and the reason for your visit, I can try to schedule an appointment." "No," Lena interrupted, desperation tinging her voice. "Please, it's about a baby. I need help. I heard you help people like me." Another pause, this time longer. Lena held her breath, her heart pounding so hard she feared Noah might wake up at the sound. Finally, the voice came again, this time slightly softer. "Wait a moment, please. I'll check if you can receive her." The next few minutes felt like an eternity to Lena. She looked around nervously, worried that someone would see her there and call the police. Noah began to stir in her arms, probably feeling the tension in his protector's grip. When the intercom came to life, Lena nearly jumped in fright. "Sir, has agreed to see you. Please come in." The gate slowly began to open with a metallic creak. Lena hesitated for a moment, the magnitude of what was about to happen finally hitting her. She looked up at Noah, who was now awake and staring at her, with his big blue eyes. "It's now or never, little one," she murmured, cradling the baby in her arms. With a deep sigh, Lena took the first step into the property. The path leading to the mansion's main entrance was lined with well-kept trees and flower beds. Under, Any other circumstances, Lena would have been in awe of the beauty of the place. But at that moment, her mind was focused on one thing: convincing Victor to help them. As she approached the front door, Lena could feel her heart racing even faster. She stopped in front of the imposing entrance, took another deep breath, and raised her hand to knock. Before she could do so, however, the door opened. A tall, middle-aged man with graying hair and piercing eyes stood there. His face, lined with lines that spoke of years of worry, wore an expression of curiosity and caution. Victor looked at Lena, then at the baby in her arms, and then back at the little girl's face. "So," he said, his voice low and controlled, "you wanted to see me?" Lena swallowed hard, feeling the weight of that moment. Everything she had planned to say seemed to evaporate from her mind. Instead, she simply nodded, unable to find words. Victor stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Come in," he said, his tone betraying no emotion. "It seems we have a lot to talk about." With her heart in her throat, Lena stepped through the threshold, entering a completely new and unfamiliar world. The door closed behind her with a soft click, sealing Lena and Noah's fate, for better or worse. The interior of the mansion was a world apart, as far removed from Lena's reality as the stars in the night sky. The foyer, with its gleaming marble floors and crystal chandeliers, seemed to swallow Lena's small frame and the baby in her arms. The contrast between the luxury around her and her shabby clothes was stark, making her feel even smaller and more vulnerable. Victor led Lena into a spacious living room where large windows let in daylight, illuminating leather sofas and bookshelves, filled with bound books. He gestured for her to sit, but Lena hesitated, fearing she might stain the pristine furniture. "Please sit down," Victor said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You both look exhausted." Lena complied, sitting on the edge of the couch, Noah still held tightly in her arms. She watched as Victor settled into an armchair across from her, his watchful eyes studying her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Well," he began, leaning forward slightly, "you have my attention. Now, would you like to tell me what brings a young girl and a newborn baby to my door on a Sunday morning?" Lena took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. This was the moment she had both feared and longed for. Her next words could change everything. "Mister," she began, her voice shaky but determined, "I know this may sound crazy, but I had no one else to turn to. I found this baby, Noah, abandoned in a shipping container a few days ago. I couldn't leave him there." Victor arched an eyebrow, his face a mask of neutrality. "And your parents? Where are they?" Lena looked down, shame and pain evident in her expression. "I don't have parents, mister. At least not for a long time. I've been living on the streets for almost a year." A heavy silence fell over the room. Victor leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Lena's face. After what seemed like an eternity, he spoke again. "And what exactly do you expect from me, young man?" The question, though expected, took Lena by surprise. What did she really expect? A home? Money? Help finding a family for Noah? All of those options seemed absurd now that she was sitting there in that luxurious room. I don't know exactly," Lena admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just know that Noah needs help. He needs a home, medical care, things I can't give him living on the streets." She paused, gathering her courage for her next sentence. "I heard that you help children in need. That maybe you could help us in some way." Victor stood abruptly, walking to the window. He stood there for a few moments, staring out at the well-kept garden, his back to Lena. When he finally turned around, his face was composed, but there was something in his eyes, a mix of emotions that Lena couldn't quite decipher. "You're right, I do help children in need," he said, his voice softer now, "but usually through donations to charities, not like this." Lena felt her heart sink. She knew it was an absurd request, but still the rejection stung. "I understand," she murmured, starting to stand. "Sorry to bother you. We'll..." "Wait," Victor's voice interrupted her. He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on Noah. Can I see the baby?" Surprised, Lena nodded, carefully handing Noah to Victor. The man took the baby with surprising gentleness, his eyes softening as he looked at the small face. He looks like, Victor began, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat, trying to hide his emotion. He reminds me of someone I knew a long time ago. Lena watched, fascinated, as Victor's face changed. The mask of indifference he had maintained until then seemed to melt before her eyes. For a moment she glimpsed the man behind the millionaire, a man who, like her, carried his own pain and loss. "You can stay," Victor said abruptly, surprising even himself with the statement. "Temporarily," he added quickly, "until we decide what to do long term." Lena blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Stay here?" Victor nodded, gently returning Noah to Lena's arms. "Yes, here. I have guest rooms that haven't been used in years. You guys can stay in one of them while we figure out what to do next." The tears Lena had held back for so long finally spilled over. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Victor cleared his throat again, visibly uncomfortable with the display of emotion. "Well, it's decided then. I'll ask Mrs., my housekeeper, to prepare a room for you and bring some things for the baby." As Victor left the room to make the necessary arrangements, Lena looked down at Noah, who was now sleeping peacefully in her arms. For the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they had found a place to call home, even if only temporarily. What Lena didn't know was that her arrival at the mansion wasn't just the beginning of a new phase in her and Noah's lives. It was also the beginning of a journey that would unearth long-buried secrets, test the limits of forgiveness, and redefine the meaning of family for everyone involved. The days that followed Lena and Noah's arrival at the mansion were a mix of adaptation and discovery for everyone involved. For Lena, it was as if she had been transported to a completely new world, full of comforts she had never imagined experiencing. The room assigned to her and Noah was larger than any space she had ever lived in. The soft bed, the clean, fluffy sheets, the new crib for Noah, it all felt surreal. Lena would spend hours just sitting on the bed, stroking the sheets, as if she feared it might all disappear at any moment. Mrs., the housekeeper Victor had mentioned, proved to be a constant and comforting presence. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and work-hardened hands, she took it upon herself to care for Lena and Noah as if they were family. "My dear," she would say to Lena in her heavily accented English, "you need to eat more, you're too skinny." And so trays of delicious food appeared in the room several times a day, far more than Lena could eat. For Noah, the change was immediate and visible. With proper nutrition, medical care, and a clean, safe environment, the baby began to thrive. His cheeks gained color, his cries became louder, and soon he began to smile. Victor, for his part, kept his distance, but his presence was felt in every detail. He was the one who arranged for a pediatrician to examine Noah, who made sure Lena had new clothes and everything she needed to care for the baby. However, his direct interactions with the new inhabitants of his home were brief and formal. Lena watched him from afar, intrigued by the man who had opened the doors of her home to two strangers. Sometimes, she caught him looking at Noah with a distant expression, as if he were seeing another person, another time. It was one afternoon, about 2 weeks after her arrival, that Lena finally gathered the courage to approach Victor directly. She found him in his office, an imposing room lined with books and featuring a large, dark wooden desk. "Sir," she called, timidly from the doorway, "can I speak to you for a moment?" Victor looked up from the papers he was examining, looking momentarily surprised. "Sure, Lena, come in." Lena walked in hesitantly, Noah held tightly in her arms. She sat in the chair in front of the desk, arranging the baby in her lap. I wanted to thank you," she began, her voice low but firm, "for everything you've done for us. I know we had no right to show up like this and—" "No need to thank me," Victor interrupted, his tone softer than usual. "You needed help, and I was in a position to offer it. It's that simple." But Lena knew it wasn't that simple. Nothing about that situation was simple. "Even so," she insisted, "you had no obligation, and I want you to know that I intend to give back in some way. I can work, help around the house, do whatever it takes." Victor watched her for a long moment, his eyes softening almost imperceptibly. "Lena," he said finally, "you're a child. Your only obligation now is to take care of yourself and Noah. Leave the rest to me." Something about the way he said it, the unexpected gentleness in his voice, caused the emotions Lena had been suppressing for so long to finally spill over. Before she could stop herself, she was crying, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Victor looked momentarily panicked at the display of emotion. He stood up, walked around the desk, and after a moment's hesitation, placed a comforting hand on Lena's shoulder. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You're safe now." At that moment, something changed between them. An invisible barrier seemed to break, and Victor allowed himself, for the first time in a long time, to feel true compassion. Over the next few days, the dynamics in the mansion began to subtly shift. Victor began eating meals with Lena and Noah, asking about their day, showing a genuine interest in their well-being. He even offered to hold Noah a few times, his eyes shining with an emotion Lena couldn't quite name, as the baby gripped his finger tightly. It was during one of these interactions that Victor finally shared a bit of his story. "I had a son once," he said softly, his eyes fixed on Noah. "Lucas, he would be about your age now, Lena." Lena felt her heart tighten. "What happened to him?" she asked gently. Victor was silent for a long moment before he answered. "He got sick. It was really quick. One day he was here, laughing and playing, and the next..." His voice trailed off, and he couldn't finish the sentence. Lena didn't say anything, but she reached out and placed her hand over Victor's, offering silent comfort. He looked at her, surprised by the gesture, but didn't pull away. "After that," he continued, "after a moment, I withdrew from everything and everyone. My marriage fell apart, I buried myself in work. I thought helping other children through donations would be enough to fill the void, but it wasn't," Lena finished softly. Victor nodded, a sad smile on his lips. "No, it wasn't." That night, as she tucked Noah into bed, Lena reflected on everything that had happened in the past few weeks. She had come to the mansion seeking help for Noah, but now she realized that perhaps she and the baby were there for another reason as well. Perhaps they could help heal a broken heart as much as Victor was helping give them a new chance at life. With that thought, Lena fell asleep, feeling truly at home for the first time in a long time. What she didn't know was that fate still had many twists and turns in store for them, and that the bonds that were beginning to form would be tested in ways neither of them could have foreseen. Weeks turned into months, and Lena and Noah's presence in the mansion went from a temporary situation to something that began to resemble a permanent one. The routine that had been established brought a sense of normalcy that none of them had expected, but that they all secretly longed for. Mornings at the mansion were now filled with the sound of Noah's laughter, which grew louder than ever before. Lena, for her part, flourished in her new surroundings. With Mrs. S's patient guidance, she learned the nuances of running a household, not as a servant, but as someone beginning to understand the value of a home. Victor, once a distant and formal figure, was now a constant presence in Lena and Noah's lives. He spent more and more time with them, whether playing with Noah in the garden or helping Lena with her homework, for he had insisted that she resume her studies, hiring private tutors to make up for the lost years. It was on a sunny Sunday afternoon that something unexpected happened, something that would shatter the peace they had built. Victor had organized a picnic in the garden, a rare occasion when he allowed himself to completely relax. Lena watched, enchanted, as he lay down on the grass, making Noah laugh as he lifted him into the air. "He looks so much like you," Lena commented absently, her eyes fixed on the scene in front of her. Victor froze, Noah still suspended in midair. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice suddenly tense. Lena, realizing too late the weight of her words, tried to explain herself. When you smile at him, there's something in your eyes. It's similar." Victor slowly lowered Noah down onto the grass, his expression thoughtful. "Lena," he said after a long moment of silence, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I recently discovered that, well, that could change everything." Lena's heart raced. She had always known the situation was too fragile to last, but she hadn't expected the end to come so abruptly. "What is it?" she asked, dreading the answer. Victor took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. "I had a DNA test done," he said finally. "Between me and Noah." Lena felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. "A DNA test? But why?" "Because I had a suspicion," Victor replied, his voice low and intense. "A suspicion that has been confirmed. Lena, Noah is my biological son." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Lena looked from Victor to Noah, trying to process the information. "But how? I don't understand." Victor ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Lena had learned to associate with discomfort. "Years ago, before I was married, I had a relationship with a woman named Isabel. It was brief, intense, and I left her. I wasn't ready for commitment at the time." Lena felt a chill run down her spine. The name Isabel echoed in her mind, bringing back memories she had buried deep inside. Victor continued, oblivious to Lena's reaction. "When I first saw Noah, something about him reminded me of Isabel, and the more time I spent with him, the stronger that feeling became. That's why I decided to take the test." "What about Isabel?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you look for her?" Victor's expression twisted into a mask of pain and regret. "I tried, but she passed away, Lena, shortly after Noah was born." The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in Lena's mind, forming a picture she could barely believe. "Isabel," she whispered, her voice shaking. She took care of me. For a while before Noah was born." It was Victor's turn to be stunned. "What? You met Isabel?" Lena nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "She found me on the streets a few months before Noah was born. She took me in, took care of me like I was hers." She paused, swallowing the lump forming in her throat. "She talked about you sometimes. She said her baby's father was a brilliant man, but he was afraid to love." Victor seemed to have aged years in a matter of minutes. I didn't know," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "If I had known—" "She got very sick toward the end of her pregnancy," Lena continued, the memories now flowing freely. "After Noah was born, she got worse quickly. Her last request was that I take care of him, that I keep him safe." She looked at Victor, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I promised her I would." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken emotions and revelations that changed everything. Victor looked at Noah, who was playing absently on the lawn, and then at Lena, seeing her in a new light. "Lena," he said finally, his voice steady despite the obvious emotion, "you kept your promise. More than that, you brought Noah to me. You brought us together." Lena felt a sudden, overwhelming fear. "What happens now?" she asked, fearing that this new development would mean the end of her stay in the mansion. Victor stood, taking Noah in his arms and holding out his hand to Lena. "Now," he said, a soft smile forming on his lips, "now we become the family Isabel always wanted us to be." As they walked back to the mansion, Lena felt like she was on the verge of a new beginning. The revelations of that day had changed everything, but they had also solidified something that had been brewing for months. What none of them knew was that this new family setup would soon face challenges that would test their newly formed bonds. Victor's past, Lena's origins, and Noah's future were about to collide in ways no one could have predicted. The months that followed the garden revelation were filled with adjustments and discoveries for the newly formed family. Victor, driven by a sense of responsibility and a genuine desire to do things right this time, dove headfirst into his role as a father. For Lena, the transition was more complex. Although she was relieved to know that her place in Noah and Victor's lives was secure, she struggled internally with conflicting feelings. On the one hand, there was the joy of finally having a home and a family. On the other, the guilt of feeling that she was somehow betraying Isabel's memory by getting so close to Victor. It was one night while putting Noah to bed that Lena finally verbalized her conflicts to Victor. "Sometimes," she began hesitantly, I wonder what Isabel would think of all this. If she would be happy or... Victor, who had been standing by the crib, turned to face her. His usually composed face showed signs of restrained emotion. Or if she would feel betrayed, he added softly. Lena nodded, unable to find the words. Victor sighed deeply, sitting down in the armchair next to the crib. Lena, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. The biggest one was abandoning Isabel when she needed me the most. There's not a day that goes by that I don't regret that. He paused, looking down at Noah, who was sleeping peacefully. But I know deep down in my heart that Isabel wanted Noah to be loved and cared for. And that's what we're doing. We're honoring her memory by giving Noah the home and family she always wanted for him. Victor's words brought a comfort Lena didn't know she needed. She felt the tears she had been holding back for so long finally spill over. Victor stood up and, in a gesture that surprised them both, hugged Lena. It was the first time they had shared such an intimate moment, and in it, Lena felt all the pain, fear, and uncertainty of the last few years begin to dissipate. However, the peace they had found was about to be shattered. One seemingly ordinary morning, while Victor was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, the mansion's doorbell rang. The lady answered the door and moments later entered the dining room with a worried expression. Sir, she said hesitantly, there's a lady here who insists on speaking to you. She says she's your ex-wife. Victor paled visibly. Eleanor, he murmured, putting the newspaper aside. Show her in, please. Lena, who was feeding Noah in a high chair, felt butterflies in her stomach. She knew little about Victor's previous marriage, only that it had ended after the loss of their son. Moments later, an elegant woman entered the room. Eleanor was the epitome of sophistication, with her impeccably styled hair and designer clothes. Her eyes, cold and calculating, swept the scene before her, settling on Lena and Noah. So the rumors are true, she said, her voice as sharp as ice. Victor, the philanthropist, taking in a homeless teenager and her baby. How touching. Victor stood up, his posture tense. Eleanor, what are you doing here? Helena smiled, but the gesture didn't reach her eyes. Oh dear, I came to see for myself. You know, people talk. And when I heard you were playing Happy Family, well, I had to see for myself. His eyes flicked to Lena, who instinctively pulled Noah closer. And you must be the new, what, daughter, lover? It's hard to tell with Victor. Eleanor, stop, Victor's voice boomed. You have no right to come here and insult my family. The word family seemed to hit Eleanor like a slap. Her face twisted into a mask of fury. Family? She spat. You dare call that family? After everything we've been through, after Lucas? Don't you dare use our son's name, Victor interrupted, his voice dangerously low. Eleanor laughed, a cold, humorless sound. Oh, but it's precisely because of Lucas that I'm here, Victor. Do you think you can simply replace him? That you can erase our pain by bringing these strangers into our home? This isn't your home anymore, Eleanor, Victor said firmly. And Lena and Noah aren't strangers, they're my family now. Eleanor's face set in a grimace of cold determination. We'll see about that, she said, turning to leave. At the door, she paused and glanced over her shoulder. Enjoy your little fantasy while you can, Victor, because I'm going to make sure it doesn't last. With those words, she left, leaving behind a heavy, tension-filled silence. Victor turned to Lena, who was pale and shaking slightly. Lena, I'm sorry you had to witness that. Eleanor is complicated. Lena nodded, still hugging Noah protectively. She can do something to separate us. Victor stepped closer, placing a comforting hand on Lena's shoulder. I won't let that happen, he said firmly. You're my family now, and I'll fight with everything I have to keep you safe. But as he said those words, Victor couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor's visit was just the beginning. The past he had tried so hard to leave behind was resurfacing, threatening to destroy the new life he, Lena, and Noah were building together. As the day wore on, a shadow seemed to have settled over the mansion. The peace they had found was shattered, and the future, which had once seemed so promising, was now shrouded in uncertainty. The days that followed Eleanor's unexpected visit were tense at the mansion. Victor spent long periods locked in his office, making phone calls and consulting with lawyers. Lena, for her part, oscillated between moments of anxiety and determination, clinging even tighter to Noah as if she feared he might disappear at any moment. It was on a particularly quiet afternoon that Mrs., always attentive to the emotional needs of the household's inhabitants, decided to intervene. She found Lena in Noah's room watching the baby sleep with a worried expression. "My dear," said the housekeeper softly, "there's no use worrying like this. You'll get sick, and then who's going to look after this little angel?" Lena smiled weakly. "I know, Mrs. It's just, after everything we've been through to get here, the thought of losing it." Mrs. sat down next to Lena, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Listen, kid, I've worked for you for more years than I care to admit, and never in all that time have I seen you as determined as you are now. He won't let anything happen to you." The housekeeper's words brought some comfort, but they didn't completely dispel Lena's worries. "What if it's not enough?" she asked quietly. "What if Mrs. Eleanor can, I don't know, prove that we're not a real family?" The lady snorted, a surprisingly loud sound coming from such a small woman. "Real family? My dear, family isn't just blood. It's love, it's caring, it's being there, and you have that in spades." At that moment, as if to emphasize Mrs.'s point, Noah woke up, his little blue eyes opening and immediately focusing on Lena. He smiled, a gummy, drooling smile that instantly melted Lena's heart. "See?" Mrs. said with a smile. "This baby knows exactly who her family is." The housekeeper's words and Noah's smile seemed to spark something in Lena, a determination she didn't know she had began to grow within her. She was no longer that scared little girl from the city streets. Now she had something to fight for. "You're right, Mrs., Lena said, her voice gaining strength. "We are a family, and we will fight to stay together." With a new resolve, Lena decided it was time to have a heart-to-heart talk with Victor. She found him in his office, surrounded by piles of documents and looking exhausted. "Victor," she called softly, "can we talk?" He looked up in surprise, but waved her in. "Sure." "Lena, what's wrong?" Lena took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I want to know the truth, all of it. About you, about Eleanor, about Lucas." Victor was silent for a long moment, his face a mask of restrained emotions. Finally, he nodded. "You're right. You deserve to know." He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the garden. For a few moments before he began to speak. "Lucas was our only child. Eleanor and I loved him more than anything. He was perfect." Victor paused, his voice choked with emotion. "When he got sick, it was like the world stopped turning. We did everything. We consulted the best doctors. We tried every treatment possible. But in the end," Lena felt tears forming in her eyes, but remained silent, letting Victor continue. "After Lucas left, Eleanor and I, we lost each other. The pain was unbearable. Instead of supporting each other, we drifted apart. I buried myself in work, in giving to charity. Eleanor, well, she never really got over it." Victor turned to face Lena, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "When you and Noah showed up, it was like the universe was giving me a second chance, a chance to do things right this time." Lena stood up and on impulse hugged Victor. He tensed for a moment, surprised, before relaxing and returning the hug. "We're a family," Lena said firmly. "No matter what Eleanor or anyone else says, we're a family and we'll fight to stay together." Victor pulled back slightly, looking at Lena with a mixture of pride and gratitude. "Yes, we are," he agreed, "and I promise you, Lena, that I will do everything in my power to protect our family." At that moment, as if the universe wanted to test his resolve, Victor's phone rang. He answered it, his expression changing from surprise to concern as he listened. "I see," he said finally. "We'll be there." Hanging up the phone, Victor turned. To Lena, his expression grave. "That was my lawyer. Eleanor filed for custody of Noah." Lena felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. But how? She's not even related to him." She's claiming that I'm emotionally unstable due to the loss of Lucas, and that you're too young to be a suitable guardian, Victor explained, his voice strained. She wants Noah placed in the care of the state until a suitable family is found. Fear threatened to engulf Lena, but she forced herself to remain calm. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Victor straightened, his shoulders, a steely determination shining in his eyes. "Now we fight, with everything we've got." As they walked out of the office, ready to face whatever fate had in store for them, Lena and Victor knew that the battle for their family was just beginning. But together, they were ready to face whatever challenge came their way. The days following the news of the custody case were a whirlwind of activity at the mansion. Victor mobilized an elite team of lawyers determined to fight with every legal weapon at his disposal. Lena, meanwhile, immersed herself in a frantic research on adoption laws and parental rights, determined not to be a mere spectator in this battle for her family. The first court hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks from now, a deadline that seemed both infinitely long and frighteningly short. The tension in the mansion was palpable, with Victor spending long hours in meetings with lawyers and Lena alternating between moments of fierce determination and paralyzing anxiety. It was in the midst of this turmoil that an unexpected visit brought a new element to the situation. One rainy afternoon, the mansion's doorbell rang, and Mrs. announced the arrival of a lady who identified herself as Margaret. Victor and Lena exchanged confused glances before going to greet the visitor. In the living room, they found a middle-aged woman with grey hair and kind eyes that seemed to carry the weight of many untold stories. "Mr. Lena," she began, her voice shaking with emotion. "I am Isabel's mother, Noah's grandmother." The silence that followed was deafening. Victor was the first to recover from the shock. "Madam, please sit down. We didn't expect—" Margaret nodded, sitting gracefully on the couch. Her eyes fell on Noah, who was happily playing on the rug, oblivious to the tension around him. "I spent months searching for Isabel and Noah," she explained. "When I finally found out what had happened to my daughter, I was devastated. But knowing that Noah was alive and well, it was like a miracle." Lena, who had remained silent until then, finally found her voice. Did you come to get Noah?" she asked, fear evident in her voice. Margaret smiled sadly. "That was my intention at first. He is my grandson, after all. But coming here, seeing how you look at him, I can see the love you have for him." Victor leaned forward, his expression serious. "Madam, we love Noah more than anything. He is our family. But we understand that you are his biological grandmother and have rights." Margaret held up a hand, gently stopping him. "Sir, I didn't come here to cause more conflict. I came because I believe I can help." Lena and Victor exchanged surprised looks. "Help?" Lena asked hesitantly. Margaret nodded. "I heard about the custody case, and I believe my testimony as Noah's biological grandmother could make a significant difference in court." Hope began to blossom in Lena's chest. Would you testify on our behalf?" "Yes," Margaret replied firmly. "Isabel always spoke well of you, mister. Even after everything, she believed you were a good man, just too scared to take responsibility at the time. And Lena..." She turned to the young woman, her eyes filling with tears. "Isabel told me about you in her letters, about how you helped her, how you promised to take care of Noah. You kept that promise in ways even my daughter could not have imagined." Victor stood, walking to the window. When he turned around, there was renewed determination in his eyes. "Madam, your help could be crucial, but I have to ask, why? Why help us instead of fighting for custody of Noah yourself?" Margaret smiled, a sad, wise smile. "Because I've already lost one daughter to life circumstances. I don't want to be responsible for tearing another family apart. Noah is happy here, he's loved. He's everything Isabel would have wanted for him." Lena couldn't hold back her tears. She knelt beside Margaret, taking her hands in hers. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea how much this means to us." Margaret squeezed Lena's hands gently. "I only ask one thing in return," she said, "that I be allowed to be a part of Noah's life. Not as a guardian, but as a grandmother who loves him and wants to see him grow up." "Of course," Victor replied without hesitation. "You're always welcome here, Mrs. Noah deserves to know his story, his heritage." With Margaret's arrival, the landscape of the legal battle changed dramatically. Victor's legal team worked tirelessly to incorporate her testimony into their strategy. Lena, for her part, found Margaret an unexpected source of comfort and wisdom, spending long hours talking about Isabel and sharing stories about Noah. As the day of the hearing approached, a cautious sense of optimism began to spread through the mansion. Margaret's presence not only strengthened their case legally, but also brought a sense of completeness to their unconventional family. However, as they prepared for their court showdown, no one at the mansion could have predicted the dramatic events that were about to unfold. The custody battle for Noah was about to take an unexpected turn, testing the bonds of their newly formed family in ways no one could have anticipated. The day of the hearing dawned grey and cold, as if the sky itself reflected the tension that hung over the family. Victor, Lena, and Margaret arrived at the courthouse early, accompanied by a team of serious-looking lawyers. Noah had been left at the mansion under the care of Mrs., who promised to call immediately if there were any problems. As they waited in the courthouse hallway, Lena couldn't stop wringing her hands, her stomach in knots of anxiety. Victor, ever the pillar of strength, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's going to be okay," he said, his voice calm but with a slight tremor that betrayed his own apprehension. "We have the truth on our side." Margaret, sitting on Lena's other side, took her hand. "Remember, dear," she said softly, "you're stronger than you think. Isabel has always seen that in you." Before Lena could respond, the courtroom doors opened. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw Eleanor enter, accompanied by her own team of lawyers. Victor's ex-wife exuded an aura of cool confidence, her eyes narrowing as they landed on Lena. The session began with formal introductions and a presentation of the case. Eleanor's attorney was the first to speak, painting a picture of Victor as an emotionally unstable man still dealing with the grief of his son, and Lena as a teenager unprepared for the responsibilities of motherhood. "Your Honor," he concluded, "we request that the child be temporarily placed in the care of the state until a suitable adoptive family can be found. It is the best interests of the child that must prevail here." When it was the defense's turn, Victor's lawyer stood up, his posture confident. "Your Honor," he began, "what we have here is not a situation of neglect or incompetence, but rather an unconventional family united by love and a genuine desire to provide the best for Noah." He then called Margaret to the stand. With calm dignity, she told her story, talking about Isabel, about how Lena had cared for Noah, and about how Victor was trying hard to be the father Noah deserved. "Your Excellency," Margaret said, her voice choked with emotion, "as Noah's biological grandmother, I can say with certainty that he is exactly where he should be, with people who love him and will do everything they can to ensure his well-being." Margaret's testimony seemed to have a significant impact, but the most crucial moment was yet to come. When Lena was called to the stand, she felt as if her legs were made of jelly. But as she sat in the witness chair, her eyes met Victor and Margaret's, and she felt a surge of strength run through her body. "Miss Lena," Eleanor's lawyer began, his voice thick with condescension, "you are only 12 years old. How can you believe you are prepared to take care of a baby?" Lena took a deep breath, remembering everything she had been through. "Sir," she replied, her voice firm, "I took care of Noah alone on the streets for weeks before I found you. It wasn't easy, but I did what had to be done because I loved that baby more than anything in the world." "What now?" the lawyer persisted. "Now that you're living a life of luxury, do you really think you can be a mother to Noah?" Lena felt a spark of indignation ignite in her chest. "Luxury doesn't make anyone a good mother," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "What does is love, dedication, and the will to do what's best for the child, no matter the circumstances. And that's what Noah has with us, a family that loves him unconditionally and will do anything to ensure he grows up happy and safe." The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected sound, muffled applause from the gallery. The judge quickly restored order, but the impact of Lena's words was palpable in the room. When Victor was called to testify, His voice was thick with emotion. He spoke about the loss of Lucas, how finding Noah and Lena had brought light back into his life, and his commitment to being the best father he could be to Noah. "Your Excellency," he concluded, "I know I've made mistakes in the past, but Noah and Lena have given me a second chance, an opportunity to make things right. They are my family now, and I will do everything in my power to protect and love them." As the judge retired to deliberate, the tension in the room was palpable. Lena, Victor and Margaret gathered together, their hands clasped in a silent gesture of mutual support. Across the room, Eleanor looked restless, her eyes constantly darting to the door through which the judge had left. When the judge finally returned, the silence that fell over the room was deafening. Lena felt her heart race as the judge prepared to announce his decision, a decision that could change the course of their lives forever. After careful consideration of all the testimony and evidence presented, the judge began, his deep voice echoing around the room. "This court has reached a decision." Lena closed her eyes, squeezing Victor's hand tightly as they awaited the verdict that would decide the future of their family. The silence in the courtroom was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. All eyes were fixed on the judge, who cleared his throat before continuing his statement. "This court recognizes that the case at hand is complex and unconventional," the judge said, his voice firm and clear. "However, our priority must always be the best interests of the child." Lena felt her heart beat even faster, her hand squeezing Victor's so tightly that her fingers turned white. "After careful consideration of all the testimony and evidence presented," the judge continued, "this court finds that custody of Noah shall remain with Victor, with Lena as joint legal guardian." A collective sigh of relief echoed through the room. Lena felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Tears of joy began streaming down her face as she turned to hug Victor, who was also teary-eyed. But the judge wasn't done. However, he added, causing everyone to turn their attention to him, "this court also recognizes Margaret's right as a biological grandmother to be a part of Noah's life. Therefore, we rule that she will have regular visitation rights, to be agreed upon by all parties involved." Margaret smiled through her tears, nodding her thanks to the judge. "In addition," the judge continued, "considering Lena's age and the unique circumstances of this case, the court will order regular visits by social workers to ensure the continued well-being of Noah and Lena. These visits will initially be monthly, with the frequency being adjusted as needed." Victor nodded solemnly, accepting the conditions imposed by the court. When the judge finally banged his gavel, ending the session, it was as if a wave of emotion swept through the room. Lena, Victor, and Margaret hugged each other, forming a circle of love and relief around their newly formed family. Across the room, Eleanor sat, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Her lawyers leaned in to whisper something in her ear, but she waved them away. When she finally stood to leave, her eyes met Victor's. For a brief moment, something like regret flickered in her gaze, before it was quickly replaced by cold determination. "This isn't over, Victor," she said softly as she passed them. "You may have won today, but don't think I've given up." Victor watched her go, a mixture of pity and exasperation on his face. "It's always been like this with her," he murmured to Lena. She never knew when to stop, but Lena barely heard his words. Her mind was already in the mansion with Noah. "Can we go home now?" she asked anxiously. "I want to see Noah." Victor smiled, the first truly carefree smile Lena had seen on his face in weeks. "Yeah, let's go. Home? Our family is waiting." The walk back to the mansion was filled with a mixture of emotional exhaustion and euphoria. Margaret accepted the invitation to accompany them, eager to see her grandson. When they finally arrived, they were greeted by a tearful Mrs. holding Noah in her arms. "Thank God!" she exclaimed, handing the baby to Lena. "I knew you could do it." Lena hugged Noah tightly, breathing in the baby smell she loved so much. "It's okay now, little one," she whispered. "We're home. We're all home." The weeks that followed were filled with adjustments and new routines. Visits from social workers, though initially stressful, soon became a normal part of their lives. Margaret became a constant and welcome presence, bringing with her stories of Isabel and a grandmotherly love that perfectly complemented their unconventional family. Victor, fulfilling his promise to be the best father he could be, cut back on his work hours to spend more time at home. He and Lena have formed a surprisingly effective partnership in raising Noah, each bringing their own strengths and experiences to the task. One afternoon, as they watched Noah take his first tentative steps into the garden, Victor turned to Lena with a serious expression. "Lena," he began, "there's something I've been thinking about for a while. Something I'd like to discuss with you." Lena felt butterflies in her stomach, fearing bad news. "What's wrong, Victor?" He took a deep breath before continuing. "I would like to legally formalize our situation, not just as Noah's guardians, but, well, I would like to officially adopt you, if you're willing, of course." Lena was speechless, tears beginning to form in her eyes. You want to adopt me?" Victor nodded, an uncertain smile on his face. "You are already my daughter in every way that matters. I would just like to make that official in the eyes of the law." With a sob of joy, Lena threw herself into Victor's arms. "Yes," she exclaimed. "Yes, I do." As they hugged, Noah babbling happily at her feet, Lena thought about how her life had changed. From being a lonely girl on the city streets, she now had a family, a home, a future. But as they celebrated this new chapter in their lives, neither of them could have foreseen the challenges that lay ahead. Eleanor's shadow still loomed over them, and Victor's past held secrets that threatened to resurface at any moment. For now, though, they were happy, united, and ready to face whatever obstacles the future might bring, together, as a family. The months that followed the court's decision and Victor's adoption proposal were relatively peaceful and happy for the family. Lena's adoption process was underway, with hearings and visits from social workers becoming part of their routine. Noah was growing up before our eyes, filling the mansion with his laughter and first words. Yet, as a constant reminder that not everything was completely settled, news about Eleanor would occasionally come in. She had moved to Europe, so the rumor went, but her lawyers continued to ask questions and solicit information, as if on the lookout for any slip-up they could use against Victor and Lena. It was on an autumn afternoon, when the leaves were beginning to turn golden and the air gained a touch of freshness, that the past knocked on the mansion's door in a way that no one could have predicted. Lena was in the garden with Noah, now almost 2, teaching him how to stack colored blocks. "When Miss Lena," she said hesitantly, "there's a man at the door asking for you. He says he's your father." Lena's world seemed to freeze. Her father? The man she hadn't seen in years, the man who had abandoned her long before she ended up on the streets. How had he found her? And more importantly, what did he want? Her heart pounding, Lena picked Noah up and followed Mrs. to the front of the mansion. There, standing uncomfortably in the foyer, was a man she barely recognized. Robert looked older and more worn than he had in her memories, with graying hair and deep lines on his face. "Lena," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "My God, how you've grown." Lena felt a mixture of emotions, anger, fear, confusion, bubbling up inside her. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Robert took a step forward, stopping when he saw Lena instinctively recoil. I came looking for you. I've spent the last few years trying to find you. When I heard about the court case, How dare you?" Victor's voice boomed, causing everyone to turn around. He had just walked in, his eyes flashing with anger. "How dare you show up here after everything she's been through?" Robert held up his hands in surrender. "Please, I just want a chance to explain, to make things right." Lena looked from Robert to Victor, feeling pulled in opposite directions. On one side, there was anger and resentment from years of abandonment. On the other, a curiosity she couldn't completely deny. Maybe we should listen to him," she said finally, surprising herself as much as the others. Victor looked at her with concern. "Are you sure, Lena? You don't owe him anything." Lena nodded slowly. "I know, but I think I need to hear what he has to say so I can move on." Reluctantly, Victor agreed, and they all headed into the living room. Mrs. took Noah to play in another room, casting worried glances at Lena before leaving. Once seated, a heavy silence fell over the room. It was Robert who finally broke it. "Lena, I know that nothing I say can make up for the years I've lost, the pain I've caused," he began. "But I want you to know that I've never, not for a moment, stopped thinking about you or looking for you." He then told a story of drug addiction, prison, and a desperate struggle to find his way back into the community. He spoke of how, upon his release from prison, he discovered that Lena had disappeared from the foster care system and how he spent the next few years scouring the country for clues to her whereabouts. "When I saw the news about the custody case, with your name and picture, it was like the world stopped," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I knew I had to come, that I had to try to make things right, even if it was too late." Lena listened to it all in silence, silent tears streaming down her own cheeks. When Robert finished, she turned to Victor, who had remained by her side, a silent, comforting presence. "What do you think?" she asked softly. Victor sighed deeply. "Lena, this is your decision, but I want you to know that no matter what you choose, you will always have a home here. You are my daughter, in heart and soon, legally." Lena nodded, grateful for the support. She turned to Robert, years of pent-up emotions finally finding voice. "I spent so much time being angry at you," she began. "Angry for abandoning me, for leaving me alone in this world. But now I have a family. I have a father who chose me, who loves me unconditionally." Robert lowered his head, the pain evident in his eyes. But Lena wasn't finished. "However," she continued, "I think there is room in my heart to forgive. Not to forget, but to forgive, and maybe to build something new." The relief on Robert's face was palpable. "This is more than I could have hoped for, more than I deserve," he said. Victor, though clearly still wary, reached out to Robert. "If Lena is willing to give it a chance, then so am I. But let me be clear, if you hurt her again, in any way, there will not be a place in this world where you can hide from me." Robert nodded solemnly, squeezing Victor's hand. "I understand completely, and I thank you for taking care of her when I couldn't, when I failed her." As the three of them talked, setting boundaries and expectations for the future, Lena felt as if a long unfinished chapter of her life was finally coming to a close. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like all the pieces of her past and present were falling into place. Yet as this unexpected reconciliation unfolded at the mansion, no one could have predicted that half a world away, Eleanor was about to make a discovery that would threaten to shake the foundations of Lena's new family once again. Winter had arrived in the city, covering the town in a white blanket of snow. At the mansion, preparations for Christmas were in full swing. It was the first Christmas they would celebrate as an officially complete family. Lena's adoption had been finalized just a few weeks earlier, just in time for the holidays. Lena, now 13, watched in wonder as Mrs. and Victor decorated a huge Christmas tree in the main hall. Noah, just turned 2, ran around trying to reach the glittering ornaments. "Careful, little one," Lena laughed, catching her brother before he knocked over the tree. "You'll have to wait a little longer to open your presents." Victor smiled, looking at his children with obvious pride and love. The past few months had been a time of adjustment and growth for all of them. Robert, Lena's biological father, had become a constant, if carefully monitored, presence in their lives. He was making a genuine effort to rebuild his relationship with his daughter while respecting the boundaries set by Victor and Lena. Noah's grandmother, Margaret, was also an integral part of their celebrations, bringing with her stories of Christmases, passed with Isabel, and family traditions that she was eager to share with her grandson. As Lena helped Noah hang an ornament on the tree, the phone rang. Victor answered, his expression changing from cheerful to serious in a matter of seconds. "I see," he said into the phone, his tone grave. "Yes, we'll be prepared." When he hung up, all eyes were on him, the festive atmosphere suddenly tense. "What's wrong, Dad?" Lena asked, concern evident in her voice. Victor took a deep breath before answering. "It was my lawyer. Eleanor is coming back to town, and she's bringing someone with her." The silence that followed was heavy, fraught with apprehension. "Who?" Lena finally asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. "A boy," Victor replied, his voice shaking. She says he's Lucas's son. The news fell like a bomb in the room. Lena felt her legs weaken, sitting abruptly on the nearest sofa, still holding Noah. But how? She asked, confused. Lucas, wasn't he just a child when... Victor nodded, running a hand over his face in a weary gesture. Yes, he was, but apparently before he got sick, Lucas had donated his sperm to a sperm bank. It was standard procedure recommended by doctors, considering the aggressive treatment he would face. He paused, letting the implications of this revelation hang in the air. Eleanor discovered this during her stay in Europe, and somehow she managed to use this genetic material. Lena felt her heart tighten, not just at the news itself, but at the evident pain in Victor's eyes. What now? What does she want? She wants us to recognize the boy as part of the family, Victor replied. Legally, genetically, he is Eleanor's grandson and my grandson. The word felt heavy in his mouth, laden with conflicting emotions. Lena looked at Noah, who was playing absently in her lap, and then back at Victor. Does this change anything? For us, I mean. Victor walked over, sitting next to Lena and putting an arm around her. Nothing changes what we have here, Lena. You and Noah are my children. This is our family. But this boy is family too, Lena added softly. Victor nodded, unshed tears shining in his eyes. Yeah, and as complicated as it is, I can't deny him the chance to know his heritage, his family. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and preparations. Eleanor arrived with little Lucas Jr., as she called him, 2 days before Christmas. Their initial meeting was tense, with Eleanor clearly uncomfortable in Lena and Noah's presence, but surprisingly civil. The boy, just 4 years old, was the spitting image of Lucas, bringing to the surface long-buried memories and emotions. Victor, upon seeing his grandson for the first time, was visibly moved, struggling to maintain his composure. It was Lena who, surprising everyone, including herself, took the first step towards reconciliation. Kneeling in front of Lucas Jr., she smiled gently. "Hi, Lucas," she said softly. "I'm Lena. Do you want to meet your cousin Noah?" The boy, shy at first, soon warmed to the prospect of having someone to play with. Within hours, he and Noah were running around the mansion, their laughter echoing through the halls. Watching the children play, Eleanor approached Victor and... Lena, her usual mask of coldness momentarily abandoned. "I know I've caused you a lot of pain," she began hesitantly. "But seeing Lucas here, seeing how you've welcomed him, maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to move forward. For the sake of the children." Victor and Lena exchanged glances, years of hurt and conflict weighing against the possibility of peace and reconciliation. "It won't be easy," Victor said finally. "There's much to overcome, much to forgive." "But it's worth trying," Lena added, surprising even herself with her words. For them, for all of us. On Christmas Eve, the mansion was filled to the brim with people like never before. Robert and Margaret had joined in the celebration, bringing with them more gifts and stories to share. Eleanor, still out of place but visibly struggling, joined in the conversation and helped with the preparations. As everyone gathered around the Christmas tree, Lena couldn't help but reflect on the incredible journey that had brought her here. From a lonely girl on the city streets to an integral part of a large, loving, if unconventional family. Victor, noticing Lena's distant gaze, approached. "What are you thinking about, daughter?" Lena smiled, tears of happiness shining in her eyes. "How unpredictable life is, how sometimes we have to go through storms to find the rainbow." Victor nodded, pulling her into a hug. "And what a wonderful rainbow we found, huh?" As the family gathered for Christmas dinner, with laughter, stories, and the occasional heartfelt moment, Lena knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Because in the end, that was what it meant to be a family, to be there for each other, through thick and thin, bound together by a love that transcended blood and circumstance. And so on that Christmas night, beneath the soft glow of the tree lights and wrapped in the warmth of her unlikely but deeply loved family, Lena finally felt she had found her true home. A home not defined by walls or names, but by the unconditional love and acceptance she had found along the way.